Professor Elson, thank you very much for being here.
My pleasure.
You spoke about emerging markets and their desire for increased representation in the global financial regulation system. What would be the implications of increased emerging market involvement?
Well, that is a critical issue of discussion within the whole agenda of the reform of the international financial architecture. How to reflect the new emerging power of developing countries like China, Brazil, India, and Russia. And there's been substantial pressure coming from these countries to increase their power in institutions like the IMF. One clear change that's been made was as a result of the latest decision on quotas in the IMF, which reflect countries' financial power, was to increase the share of financial quotas for the large emerging and developing countries. And as a result of the latest quota reform that is supposed to be completed by the end of next year, all the 4 BRIC countries, for example, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, will be represented within the top 10 important countries of the IMF. So it's clear that their role needs to increase and is in the process of being increased.
After the Asian financial crisis in 1997-1998, there were widespread calls for reform which were promptly ignored and forgotten. What makes this time different? What makes you feel that the reforms this time are really going to happen and be significant?
Well, what was significant about the Asian financial crisis, and that marked what I refer to in my book as the second reform of the global financial architecture, was that it brought into being a new global cooperative effort in the area of regulatory reform and other efforts to improve the infrastructure of financial markets. That effort, however, was focused primarily on the emerging market countries to deal with some of the problems that had given rise to the crises that occurred in the 90s. What's different today is that the problem of financial fragility and financial crisis has erupted in the advanced countries. So the major change that one is observing is that this effort at improving regulatory cooperation is now being focused primarily among the advanced countries.
In your talk, you mentioned the role of central bank swaps. Could you briefly explain for us the nature and role of these swaps, their role in the financial crisis, and particularly their importance to the IFA?
The central bank swaps that were developed beginning in late 2008 played a critically important role in helping to put in place a global financial safety net to deal with liquidity problems that a number of countries were facing. The Federal Reserve Bank was probably the most active central bank in this activity and set up approximately 15 or 16 bilateral lending arrangements with other central banks all over the world, some with unlimited access to dollar funding that it could provide to meet liquidity needs that financial institutions in the countries where these swaps were established needed to have available. And in addition to those swap lines that were set up by the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank, a number of other country central banks, like the Bank of England, the Bank of Japan, the European Central Bank set up some of their own lines of credit to deal with immediate liquidity needs that financial institutions faced in the crisis. So it was clear now, with the benefit of hindsight, that without this network of bilateral swap lines to meet liquidity needs for institutions that were severely affected by the crisis would have been far more severe than it was.
Dr. Elson, thank you very much.
Thank you. My pleasure.